Welcome back to the channel. I'm back with the third episode of Hometown Horrors, so here are 5 more true stories from your neck of the woods. Allentown, Pennsylvania. On September 23rd, 2019, emergency services receive a call from a distraught 37-year-old mother by the name of Lisa Snyder, who reported to have found her children, 8-year-old Connor and 4-year-old Brinley, hanging from a beam in the basement. Paramedics responded immediately and found Connor and Brinley unresponsive and in cardiac arrest. The children were hanging 3 feet apart by a single dog leash. The leash was wrapped around the main support beam of the basement, and each end of the leash was around the children's necks. Alongside the children were 2 wooden dining room chairs that were knocked over. Paramedics were unable to revive the children with CPR, so they rushed them to a nearby hospital. They were taken off life support 3 days later. When authorities questioned why Lisa didn't do anything to save her children, she claimed that she was having an anxiety attack that made her sweat profusely. The deaths were ruled as suspicious, and during the investigation, Lisa protested her innocence, claiming that Connor had been bullied by kids at school and had threatened to commit suicide a few weeks earlier. However, video footage from the bus that brought Connor home that fatal day showed a happy child with no signs of distress. There was also no reason given for Brinley's supposed suicide. In addition to all this, Connor had a physical disability that would have made it physically impossible for him to hang himself. Authorities later discovered a sexually explicit exchange with a man on Facebook Messenger, where they discovered that Lisa had sent him photos of her having sex with a family dog. Lisa was arrested on December 2nd and charged with first-degree murder, third-degree murder, tampering with evidence, endangering the welfare of children, animal cruelty, and sexual intercourse with a dog, and is currently being held in prison without bail. Because the case is still current, Lisa's attorneys filed motions indicating they'll pursue a mental infirmity defense, claiming Lisa had a chronic history of severe mental disorders, including major depression with psychotic features, anxiety disorder, affective disorder, and postpartum depression dating back to when she was 16 years old. Hongerige, the Netherlands. The Netherlands is generally a pretty safe country, with petty crimes such as bag snatching and pickpocketing in the largest cities being the largest of crimes. Crime rates in smaller towns are non-existent. Hongerige town has a population of 30. So when in February 1991, Hannelore Klinkhamer was reported missing by her husband Richard, it came as a shock to the town and the greater Hongerige area. There were no leads, and police deemed the case suspicious, naming Richard as the prime suspect. According to mutual friends, Richard didn't look for his missing wife, and the friends were aware of the couple's violent quarrels. According to the friends, Richard had a rough upbringing, witnessing his uncle being murdered and his aunt being raped at just 5 years old. He lived in Austria at the start of World War II, but fled back to the Netherlands. After the war, to make ends meet, his mother worked as a prostitute while Richard was in and out of foster care. He joined the French Foreign Legion, a volunteer army made up of foreign misfits, before becoming a crime writer. He met his wife, Hannelore, 10 years his junior in 1978, and the two married shortly after, but Richard started to drink heavily and become violent towards her. Because of Richard's behaviour, mutual friends attributed this behaviour to Hannelore's disappearance, but after searches of the home and property failed to find any clues related to Hannelore's disappearance, the investigation against Richard was dropped. Richard had already released 2 successful crime dramas, Obedient as a Dog and Hotel Red, the former drawing heavily on his experience as a trained killer for the French Foreign Legion, but a year after his wife's disappearance, Richard had written a manuscript called Woensdag Hotdag, which translates to Wednesday Mince Day. The manuscript was a theory on how he killed his wife by putting her through a meat grinder, then feeding the ground flesh to pigeons. Fortunately, it was never released and Richard sold the home. The new owners decided to renovate the home's 200 square foot garden. That's when construction workers accidentally came across the remains of Hongerige buried beneath the garden shed. Richard had used compost to disguise the smell of rotting flesh. Those close to the case state that Richard loved the notoriety of being suspected of killing his wife, and even tried to profit off a misfortune by writing that manuscript. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison for his wife's murder, but was later released in 2003 after only 2 years for good behaviour. In January of 2016, he committed suicide and died at the age of 78. Springfield, Missouri. On June 14, 2015, authorities were called to a home in Springfield, Missouri, where they found the body of Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard. They were alerted after friends reported concerning posts on her Facebook account and unanswered phone calls, although a car was still in the driveway and hadn't moved. Dee Dee had one daughter who lived with her, Gypsy Rose, who was severely ill and needed constant medical attention and supervision. She was nowhere to be found when police arrived at the home. One of Gypsy's friends advised police of Gypsy's online boyfriend in Wisconsin. Police tracked the IP address from the latest Facebook post to a Wisconsin residence in Big Bend. The next day, police agencies in Waukesha County raided the home and arrested Nicholas Gojon and Gypsy Rose. Investigators then discovered that Gypsy's severe illnesses were false. According to Gypsy Rose's father, Rod Blanchard, Dee Dee was convinced that an infant Gypsy suffered from sleep apnea. He began taking her to hospital several times. All tests returned negative. Dee Dee would continue to invent medical conditions for her daughter, which she later attributed to an unspecified chromosomal disorder. After a minor accident on a motorbike where all that Gypsy suffered was a knee abrasion, her mother confined her to a wheelchair. Dee Dee homeschooled Gypsy for most of her childhood due to the supposed illness, despite biopsies returning negative. But Dee Dee continued to claim that her daughter had severe ailments. To continue the con, Gypsy was forced to shave her head bald and wear wigs, Botox her saliva glands to simulate drooling, and feed her a liquid diet through a feeding tube. Dee Dee reached out to the communities in each of the places that they lived, receiving a great deal of charitable contributions in Louisiana and Missouri, namely staying in Ronald McDonald houses during medical appointments, receiving free flights to see doctors in Kansas cities, free trips to Disney World, and backstage passes to Miranda Lambert concerts via the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Dee Dee had also convinced Gypsy that she was 14 when she was actually 18 at the time. When Gypsy tried to speak out against her mother or escape, Dee Dee would physically abuse her. In addition, Dee Dee smashed Gypsy's computer with a hammer and threatened to do the same to her fingers, leashed and handcuffed her to bed for 2 weeks, and filed paperwork to the police claiming Gypsy was mentally incompetent to put her off going to the police for help. It wasn't until 2012 when Gypsy met Nicholas Gojon through an online Christian singles chat group. The relationship was exclusively online until meeting for the first time in the beginning of 2015. Nicholas made the 8.5-hour drive down to Springfield to meet Gypsy for the first time before returning back to Big Bend and continuing their relationship online. The two knew they couldn't be together as long as Dee Dee was still in the picture. Gypsy was suffering abuse and had no way out. Nicholas was her only lifeline, but rather than call authorities, the two began planning to kill Dee Dee. In June of 2015, Nicholas returned to Springfield and hid in Dee Dee and Gypsy's empty home while they were away at a doctor's appointment. When they returned, Nicholas stabbed Dee Dee several times in the back while she was asleep. Nicholas then fled the house with Gypsy, taking $4,000 cash that Dee Dee left in the house, and fled to a motel outside Springfield before making it to Big Bend, Wisconsin. Gypsy Rose pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in July of 2016. a judge sentenced her to a 10-year prison sentence. Nicholas, on the other hand, was found guilty by a jury of his peers for first-degree murder in November 2018. Fall River, Massachusetts. We head to Fall River, Massachusetts, where the infamous Borden family experienced a tragedy. Before Lizzie Borden became widely known for the suspicious circumstances surrounding the deaths of her father and stepmother, her great-great-uncle, Ladwig Borden, had already been tied to murders. For anyone who's visited the Lizzie Borden house or learnt about the case, you may already know that there are children who occupy the bedroom upstairs on the 3rd level, now referred to as the Hosea Knowlton room in the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast. This is known to be the most active room in the house, as the playful children open and close the bedside drawer and play with the toys in the bedroom. Their unrelated deaths are often overlooked due to the events that occurred on August 4th, but is equally as disturbing. The Bordens have been in Fall River for generations, with Ladwig being a second-generation American. While he married 4 times, we're going to focus on his second wife, Eliza Darling. He married Eliza after his first wife, Maria, died. He had 2 children with Maria and cared for them, and later had 3 more with Eliza, Maria Jr., Eliza Ann, and Huldah. Together, Ladwig Borden and his family lived behind the current Lizzie Borden house on 2nd Street. Tragedy struck while Ladwig was out of town. Eliza had taken 3 of her children over to the neighbouring home to visit the Kellys. Eliza dropped the children into the basement cistern, causing 2 of the 3 children to die. Eliza ended her life shortly after. There are a couple of versions of her demise, committing self-destruction behind the cellar chimney or by slicing her throat with Ladwig's straight razor upstairs in the home. Either way, Eliza met her end that day. It should be noted that it's unknown if the Kellys were home at the time, nor had I found anything to confirm or deny the Kellys' involvements in the events on that fateful day in 1848. Of the 3 children, Maria survived. Learning of the devastation, Ladwig found Maria in the cistern, and with the help of locals, Maria was rescued. She lived to an old age, having children of her own. Ladwig remarried twice before passing away in 1874. Strangely, Ladwig's nephew, Andrew Borden, purchased the Kellys' former residence where his cousins had been murdered 24 years earlier, and it's believed that he also inherited Uncle Ladwig's property after his passing. With this as common knowledge in Fall River society, when Lizzie Borden was on trial for the murders of her parents, prosecutors carefully examined to determine if she was mentally competent. Questions were asked to the sanity of the Borden clan in general, and not surprisingly, the topic of Eliza Borden and the events in 1848 were brought up as a possible source of inherited madness. This was quickly shot down, as Eliza was only a Borden by marriage, and not a blood relation to Lizzie at all. It's not known why Eliza did what she did. Today, it might be chalked up to postpartum depression, which was unfortunately poorly understood, if at all recognised in those times. More commonly in those times though, others have related it to an evil spirit which haunts the basement of the Lizzie Borden house, and subsequently causes those susceptible to become insane. Today, guests who stay at the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast leave toys for the children in the guest rooms as a gesture, and some guests have claimed to have heard childish laughter and children playing on the 2nd and 3rd floors. I was unfortunate enough to not experience this in my stay, but I can confirm that after stepping inside the Lizzie Borden house, it certainly has an eerie feeling to it. Lumberton, North Carolina. The remains of 3 women were found within a 4-block radius of each other in 2017 in East Lumberton, North Carolina, after they were reported missing by their families. The victims are 32-year-old Christina Bennett, 36-year-old Rhonda Lynn Jones, and 28-year-old Megan Ann Oxidine. The area in East Lumberton has long been regarded as a crime-ridden sector of the city. those who live and work in the neighbourhood say drugs and prostitution are prevalent. The women were found within a 4-block radius along East 5th and East 8th Streets. On April 18th, authorities found the bodies of Christina and Rhonda. Christina, who was known as Kristen to her family, had been discovered in a vacant house by the railroad tracks on the 500 block of Peachtree Street. Officers were responding to a complaint about a suspicious odour coming from the house. 500 feet away, neighbours were outside wondering what the police were doing. These neighbours also encountered a smell from a trash can outside a vacant house in East 5th Street. When they opened the lid, they found Rhonda's dead body inside. Both women were nude. Christina showed no signs of physical trauma, while Rhonda showed cuts and bruises and a broken nose. Autopsy results noted drugs present: cocaine, a nerve medication, and nicotine. But the medical examiner couldn't determine if drugs were the cause of the deaths. Because of the decomposition, suffocation couldn't be ruled out either, thus the deaths were ruled undetermined. After Rhonda and Christina's bodies were found, Megan talked to local news crews. She was friends with Rhonda and expressed disbelief, saying, quote, "I don't understand how people could do somebody's child, mother or niece like that." 2 months later, on June 3rd, Megan was found in the yard of an abandoned house on East 8th Street, partially concealed by branches and shingles. Like the 2 other victims, she was naked, but was also left gagged and bloodied. An autopsy result also noted that drugs were present in her system: cocaine, nicotine, caffeine, and morphine. Within months of Christina, Rhonda, and Megan's deaths, 2 other women disappeared from the Lumberton area. 41-year-old Cynthia Twister Jacobs, who was last seen on July 27th, and 20-year-old Abby Patterson reported missing on September 5th. Abby had just returned to Lumberton and was last seen entering a brown Buick down the street from her mother's house on East 9th Street. Both Twister and Abby were recently sober after being clean from drug abuse. With a population of about 20,000 people, it's bizarre that 5 women with families and strong ties to the community have vanished without a word. Although the cases are officially unlinked, it's undeniable that the proximity of where the victims were found or went missing call for a reason to suspect a serial killer is on the loose. As this is an active case, anyone watching this in the United States who has any information should call FBI Charlotte on 704-672-6100. I'll also put that number in the description below. And that brings us to the end of the video.